speak. He was an All-American basketball player at the University of Maryland in the early 70s. He played pro ball for 10 years. In 2002, he was voted one of the Atlantic Coast Conference's top 50 greatest basketball players. Yes, he's in the room. He's a noted basketball analyst for 20 years, covering the NCAA and the NBA. He's been an analyst for ESPN for more than 8 years. He's a sports attorney and a partner at Dreyer LLP, and he's our keynote speaker tonight, Len Elmore.
Well, thank you, Robin. That was probably the loveliest introduction I've ever had. Or maybe the loveliest introducer I've ever had, one way or the other. How about Robin? And how about another warm round of applause? Congratulations to the coaches, Coach Chaparelli, Coach Marinello, Coach Mayfield, Coach St. Lawrence, and Coach St. Lawrence. Let me say one thing. I went to University of Maryland, so that's not that far. We're both under the Mason-Dixon line. So maybe my SAT score wasn't where it needed to be. Harvard was postgraduate, so you know how that works. Anyway, welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm particularly pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you today, not only because of the common purpose that binds us all. That's why we're here, to honor the men who have dedicated their lives to teaching and mentoring young athletes, but also because we're just one day removed from one of the most momentous days in the history of our beloved country. And you knew I was going to go there. Last night, and it doesn't matter what side you were on before yesterday, last night when Barack Obama was declared the winner of the presidential election, all I could think of was that I wish my late parents were here to see that, to see it all unfold. I can hear them say, it was education and seizing the opportunity that got President-elect Obama the win. Particularly my mother, who would have said, I told you so. With education, you can be anything and anyone you choose. She would have reminded me of her battle with my 4th grade teacher, who tried to dissuade me from being a lawyer, telling me, well, you know, you'd be pretty good as a carpenter or a plumber. And maybe that's because my middle nickname was Joe. I don't know if that's... My mother would have repeated the admonishment about education as something that can never be taken away from you, and that it was indeed a foundation for realizing whatever potential that resides within us all. Now, also during the past election, in preparing for this talk, I thought about how far we've come collectively as a nation, as a society, and as a culture. I've always been proud to be an American, even in the face of adversity. From childhood days when I witnessed the civil rights struggles on television, through my teenage days when I was one of those protesters against the war in Vietnam. Even then, I knew that our freedom was tied up in our ability to express our dissatisfaction with the status quo. I knew that we could and we would change the course of events with the will and the power of right-thinking people joined together for that common cause. My pride as an American was, in fact, that this change, this power, this will of the people could only happen here and no other place on earth. God bless America. Now, even though I still get goosebumps thinking of how far we've come, to illustrate that distance is to peek at the story of our honored guest, Mr. Solly Walker, from whom you'll get the real deal shortly. Now, in 1951, he was the first black player ever to play basketball at St. John's University. Jackie Robinson had just finished his 5th season as a Dodger. Dr. Martin Luther King hadn't even begun his crusade for freedom and dignity. And it's just 6 years after World War II, 4 years after our armed forces were integrated, and we remained in the throes of the Korean War, where soldiers of color fought side by side with their white brothers in arms. In 1951, education was a difference maker between earning a decent living and scraping by. And my mom was second in her high school class in a small town in Louisiana. She had an opportunity to attend Southern University in Louisiana, which is a fine historically black institution. However, she had to decline because she needed to come to New York with her sister to get a job, to send some money home to help her family, who were poor subsistence farmers in Louisiana. Instead of college life, she lived a life of cleaning and scrubbing in a big, strange city. My dad, he never liked school either. He dropped out after the 10th grade. After a stint in the Army where he was stationed in Japan, in the occupation forces, and where he was stationed in the South, where he saw German POWs receive better treatment than he and his fellow black soldiers did, where the POWs had the ability to eat in restaurants in towns where he and his company were barred. He got a job ultimately coming back to New York driving an appliance company delivery truck. But things changed for the better, and they both studied civil service test books and they became city workers, civil servants. My dad was a sanitation man. My mom was a civil service clerk. But without a doubt, they wanted life better for my siblings and me. Education was the key. Now, 1954 was momentous, not just because of the sweeping national change about to occur because of Brown versus Board of Education and its order to desegregate schools with all deliberate speed, but also because of this. Mr. Walker received his college degree. An All-American basketball player, Mr. Walker chose to forego a pro basketball career for a calling to education. Can you imagine that happening today? 54 years later, maybe money or the lack thereof in pro sports had something to do with his decision, and only Mr. Walker will have the answer for that. But the notion that the pursuit of education, at least equally important, if not more important, than a mere career in professional sports, that would be blasphemy in today's society. Now, by comparison to the 1954 world in which my mom as a young woman lived, in which Mr. Walker as a young man lived, today opportunity abounds. Witness the election and its symbolism. With many of our young folks today, unfortunately, particularly those of color, we are continually faced with a lack of preparation and proper guidance, maybe from some of us adults. There can be no question that in disadvantaged communities, we have overinvested in dreams of sports and entertainment stardom. Maybe it's because heretofore other avenues towards achievement have been choked off due to discrimination and maybe other animus. And maybe, just maybe, widespread access to achievement has been limited by a lack of preparation, including poor education. In any event, over the last 25 or 30 years, as a society, and the black community in particular, we have consciously or unconsciously pushed our children away from intellectual and educational pursuits as a priority and towards the fleeting and unreliable pursuit of sports or entertainment achievement. Now, I feel, and I hope you feel the same way, we have a responsibility to do more to open our kids, all of our kids, to a world of lasting education, of lifelong learning habits. And we've got to do that to counteract the short-term thinking of hoops and hip-hop, which has stunted the intellectual development of our kids and created what I consider a mutant culture beyond anything that those who struggled in Brown versus the Board of Education and other civil rights educators could have even imagined. And I have teenage kids, so I know from whence I speak. Now today, let's think about this. The high school dropout rate is a national disgrace, even as it pertains to student athletes. In the top 50 urban school districts in America, 17 districts graduate less than 50% of their students. And I'm talking about all students. And a total of 33 school districts, the top 50 school districts, 33 of them graduate under 60%. Detroit graduates just 25, Indianapolis 30, Baltimore 35. The dropout rates for black and Hispanic students are even higher.